there is an inevitability with reality shows that there's going to be some falseness. There's going to be some fabrication of storylines, some manipulation of the viewer. But with Dance Moms, there's an added element of authenticity, especially when you look at the earlier seasons where they didn't really see it as a way of getting really famous. They didn't see this themselves rather as being reality stars. They were just regular people. And initially it was kind of meant to be a documentary for Lifetime. It certainly wasn't envisioned that it would turn into what it had by like season 4. And so in season 1, you see all of these characters in ways which are really authentic and really similar to characters which we might have encountered. There's different aspects to this. I think it's easy to get hung up on the more surface level, class-based archetypes. Kelly was a character, not a character maybe, but like a person on the show with whom this is most evident. Her social status, her class, the story of how she ended up in the position that she is. Abby talks about this frequently. It is that she married a man who made a good income, and this enabled them to live in the suburbs, and she didn't work. She had 3 children. She had the means to take care of them and the means to do that and to have a certain lifestyle and to drink wine and to do things like that, like recreational upper middle class. And you could hear it in her tone. You could hear it in, see it in the way she carried herself. And I think it's really interesting that Kelly, at least for me, and I think a lot of fans would agree, she is one of the better characters, or the better people. I'll just say characters for the sake of this video, because I keep going back and forth and it causes pauses like this. But anyway, character. Because she was so predictable, she was so neurotypical. Compare this to her, and I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling a lot, but compare this to Christy, who you can see she has some skeletons in the closet. Something bad happened to her. She's not a secure individual. She's a mean girl in the way that she treats new moms. For example, Leslie, Jill, who's Sarah's mom? Little Sarah Hunt. I forget who her mom's. Oh, Christy, or Christy with a Y. Christy Ray. There's a lot of Christys, but Asia's mom. Ashley. And then basically every mom on the team except Kelly. And I guess she wasn't actively anti-Holly because that would be like racist coded, and she doesn't seem like she would want to be racist coded, not even socially necessarily, although certainly that's part of it. She does seem like being a Democrat is like a little bit part of her identity, just a smidge. Is that the expression smidge? Anyway. I also think that she just personally doesn't identify herself as someone who would be like mean to a black person, being like a baby boomer or like a Gen Xer. It's kind of, yeah, it's a touchy. Anyway, I think all of the moms actually kind of avoided being mean to Holly for this reason. I guess I'll just expand on this really quickly. And then we'll get back to the original point. I think it's interesting, like Holly's treatment. She was at once the most oppressed mom on the show, and I'm maybe poor choice of words, but she had the worst time there in dealing with Abby, in actually getting her kid like where she wants and making inroads in relationships. but very few people were actively mean to her in the same way that they were to Brynn and Ashley, except when the music video stuff was happening in like season 5. And even then, they weren't that bad. They were passive aggressive, and I guess that's the underlying thing I'm remarking on, is that I think Dance Moms, again, why it's such a great show, and tying it back to the original point, is because there's this unscripted element, both by inertia and also by virtue of the fact that it's about children, so you're gonna have some true feelings slip in it. It's not like you can't curate the way a child will react fully, and a mother and a child's relationship is like something which will, for most people, is not something that they're going to be willing to fake, or they're not going to yell at their kid for no reason, or they're going to let their relationship with their child dictate how they behave in the show, regardless of any other factors, obviously, unless you're Yolanda. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of truth to it, and I think it alters how people behave generally on that show. The general atmosphere is of candidness, of candor, I don't know. People are generally exaggerating existing emotions on that show, at least in the earlier seasons before everyone became a cloud chaser. But the people who were normal before the show are kind of normal after. Like, they retain some of that relatability, and how they react to things is similar how normal people react to things on like Stars in Love Island or something like that. And so it explains a lot about society. And so the racism thing aside with Holly, and yeah, like I said, a lot of it is deeply passive-aggressive, and it kind of displays to you the nature of systemic racism, which is basically gatekeeping. It is not actively excluding, it's very passive, but it's nonetheless extremely profound, perhaps, undoubtedly, indubitably less profound than it was during the Jim Crow era or something like that, but it is nonetheless very much there. And I'm not like a BLM type, but I agree with the message to some extent. Like, the critical race theory aspect of it is so many things are just baked into the cake, baked into the institutions, into things like education and entertainment and different like cultural archetypes, the limitation, or rather the limited choice that people of color, or Black people more specifically in this case, but people of color as well, we're just focusing on Holly and Mia's experience for this. They have very limited options. They can either be the ghetto, Nikaya, I'm using this in air quotes, by the way, like that's, I don't know if like they're referred to that as ghetto on the show, but it's certainly a common way that Black women who are kind of like quote unquote trashy, or lower class, or less like white passing, are described in a derogatory sense, now that you know what ghetto means. Yeah, you can either be like Nikaya and Kaya's situation, Black Patsy from season 2, who are portrayed as like very aggressive throughout the show, even more so when she left Dance Moms, when she left Abby Lee's, but even when she was at the ALDC, I feel like all the other moms were like, they're like a little afraid of her, you know? And you're not gonna argue with me if you watch the show on this. Like, maybe these are not the best examples for this, but just trust me. Yeah, there's like a fight scene also in season 6 where it's her and Jill, and like Jill's like, she's like a menace, she's like this woman is dangerous. Like, I think she literally said dangerous or unhinged or something, but like implying that she needs to be like physically detained, and it's like sorry about that, my camera died. But anyway, yeah, so Nikaya and Kaya were generally portrayed as like this bad type of Black person, Black people. They were condescended to, they were spoken to in ways which implied that they are in some ways dangerous or other, or ghetto, whatever, it's a very broad term, with a lot of cultural history, so it's difficult for me to fully express, I guess, how white people feel when they see black people, and no less difficult for them even to describe it about themselves. I'm saying this like I'm not white myself, but like, more specifically, I mean like white Americans, white people from like the Midwest or something, or from the South, people who have a deep cultural history, generational history of interaction, in Canada. I don't have the same, like, sure, like to some extent the media that Hollywood exports is global, but you don't fully internalize it unless you also have some sort of experience to go along with it. And I've known like closely in like personal relationships, maybe like 3 black people, and they were all very nice. I don't know, I don't perceive them, any differently than I would. I perceive them like as white people, honestly, as opposed to like other groups, which is interesting. But anyway, yeah, so it's a very binary thing, with Holly Nia being sort of the Obama type, respectable politics, whatever. Her husband, or Nia's father, was in nonprofits, and he made like $200K a year. Like, their experience on the show is, I think, very very illustrative of the subtle impression of people who, of like black people primarily, but just like non-white people in general, is they are kind of excluded from these networks, from relationships, from opportunities, because they don't fit sort of people's mold, people's expectation of what a successful dancer is. Like, no one would ever picture Nia, or Cameron for that matter, and Cameron was just as good as like Kalania, I'd say. Like, she was a lot better than Nia. She was really good. And I don't think anyone for a second imagined that it would be her on top and not someone like Bryn. I don't think people even pictured Kalani at the top, and I think there's some racial aspect to this as well. But it's a very white show. And anyway, what I was really getting at though is not the racism. I think that's kind of whatever. Actually, it's like an aside. What I find most interesting is the way that it just displays group dynamics and the way that they evolve through time. And I think it's extremely Hegelian, actually, because, well, Hegel talks about phenomenology. He talks about the study of phenomenon, of things which occur and continue to occur, and maintaining an element of continuity. That sounds like extremely redundant, but the way that I like to describe it is by looking at humanity and the Geist, the soul of humanity. And this is a soul which Hegel believes, as far as I know. I haven't read the guy. But, he believes that there's a soul of the times, a spirit of the times, the Zeitgeist. I believe Zeit means now, or times. I don't know. I don't know how it translates. It's in German, but yeah, the Zeitgeist, the spirit, the current state of the Geist, is expressing itself in like various different things, and it is also fractal-like, meaning it replicates the same way it does in art. For example, the Renaissance, in the same way it replicates itself in philosophy, advocating for humanism, and like making advancements in how we conceptualize the human soul and what rights we think people ought to have. And this complexity grows in different areas. It's also a yearning for the beautiful, hopefulness. And so the Renaissance is an all-encompassing period of history because it affects all things. And the way that it affects them is through these smaller kind of expressions of the Geist. And that's the fractal-like nature, is interpersonal relationships, connections, social circles. They all form around this spirit, and they're molded by it. And there is like underlying principles to it, because, well, I don't want to get too technical, but basically he thought that history is just the process of humanity kind of gaining ultimate self-consciousness and understanding itself by seeing itself be reflected in the actions that it does. And I think that in a similar way for dance moms, for any sort of, I guess, documentary. No, actually, no. I think that this Dance Moms is very unique. I think you could actually apply this to The Office, this like effect, which is ironic, because The Office is obviously a mockumentary, but it's like one part of a dialectic, of a synthesis, of the synthesis of which is the show itself, and then the technical aspects of the show. So like things which the writers can control. That's one part of the dialectic. And it's very intentional, it's very driven, and you can sort of disregard that, or you need to, I guess, to really get at the angle which makes it seem like a documentary. You kind of have to ignore that and ignore the writing. And look at the second aspect of the dialectic, which is the spirit of the times, because it's such a long show, and there's so many things which allow for the spirit to show itself also, such as it's very casual, it's very unrestricted to the kind of things that the writers can write, and the writers are themselves influenced by the times, and it's not just like a bunch of old Hollywood white guys making it. I'm gonna have to cut that out. We'll see if it made it. There's a lot of gatekeeping involved, and so it doesn't produce really an authentic effect in the same way that young, sort of uninitiated writers do. And I think most of the cast at the time was relatively B, C to fucking Z-list. Who even knows who Kevin Malone or I don't know, I forget who plays him. Ed Helms? Yeah, who even knows who that guy is? No one knew his name before The Office. And so we get a glimpse into people who also, had oftentimes authentic experiences which correlated to The Office. Such as David Wallace, for example. His character is very similar to the actor who plays him. He was in the New York stock exchange, involved in the stock trading. He was a finance bro, and then he was climbed the corporate ladder. I don't know exactly what he does, but he was similarly CFO tier, high powered position, similar interpersonal relationships, similar communication skills. And I think you see that greatly reflected in his character, even if the actor himself is not that good. Maybe he wouldn't do very well in a different role. He plays the character, I think, in a way which is better than someone like Leonardo DiCaprio would, because it is reflective of the Geist. It is reflective of the spirit of the times. In some very niche ways, obviously, a lot of these archetypes are kind of already there. And they're still reflective of the Geist, I guess, because they were created in the first place, but that's not relevant to the discussion of kind of witnessing this evolution, which is what I'm talking about. The remarkability of The Office is that it captures, if you isolate it and kind of purify it, the public response. I bet if you really analyze an episode of The Office, in great detail in the context of all which came before and so on and so forth, you would come to the conclusion that you can decipher meaningful things. You can decipher how people responded to the 2008 financial crisis. You can sort of deduce what the way that the tone shifted afterwards, or the general hopes and fears of technology and how people's relationship with technology shifts over the course of the show. First drowning the car in the lake, and then basically having iPhones and laptops, and you kind of have to know some of The Office to know what I'm talking about right now. But it does tell us a great deal about phenomenon, and I'm not quite prepared to make analysis for The Office right now, but in terms of Dance Moms, it's a similar effect. And that there's not a lot of gatekeeping, and plus the stories themselves are actually authentic. In The Office, they're based on things which are authentic. They are inspired by the, mundanity of The Office, but they're not directly based on it. And in Dance Moms, it is a very direct reflection of the way that group dynamics really do change. And not just in the way of, I guess, the broader cultural trends, like something like the technological revolution or the Renaissance, but just even the more base aspects of those processes. In other words, how do we arrive from A to B in a very, very small controlled sense? And what I mean by this is we witness the way that different characters in the show rise and fall, and I think this greatly mirrors the rise and fall of nations, of states, of leaders. I think it maybe is kind of an exaggeration to say that it gives us really profound detail into things like why did Russia invade Ukraine or whatever, but on a very base level, you observe the way that Melissa first starts off being kind of like hated on and not being popular. Then eventually she becomes popular by virtue of her daughter being in a Sia music video, and how she holds on to dear life for that, and how she embodies all of the negative traits of the people who were cruel and mean to her for no reason, and how she verbally abuses and bullies other people. And the same is true of other moms who were oppressed, even Ashley, who I liked for a while. I think she later participated in some of the bullying of the mini-moms. And the mini-moms, Stacy and Yolanda, participate in the bullying of the newer mini-moms. Actually, I don't know what Yolanda did, because she was like mentally ill when she left. I think she was gone for most of the beginning of season 8, like the new generation or whatever. And when she came back, she was kind of the one getting bullied because she came in late, and Stacy already like poisoned the well and like messed with her reputation because of the choking incident. But yeah, Stacy, who was previously getting bullied by Melissa and the other moms and talked down to by them, she goes on New Generation. Suddenly she's the Melissa of the New Generation team. She's the Melissa of season 8, and it's like, I don't know, it makes me not want to form relationships with anyone ever the more I watch that show, because the insight that it gives you into human psychology over the course of years is, I think, so valuable, but also so profoundly blackpilling, because you realize that people don't, not all people, but a lot of people are able to get away with being really evil, and you see the way that they are evil, and it's evil not because they want bad things, rather it's the reason for which they want them. They don't even like actively have an issue with any of the moms they bully. They just do it for like survival, for self-preservation, to maintain their rank in the social hierarchy. And that is extremely like dark, I think, when you think of something like the Nazi movement, for example, in Germany. I don't know if you're aware of what happened there, but it was basically just people following along, and very enthusiastically so. I mean, when we think of the words following along, we picture someone kind of reluctantly dragging their feet, but they're not dragging their feet. They're skipping and like clapping their hands for glee, except they don't actually care. And it's like, how can you trust anyone when the world is filled with snakes like Jill and Jessalyn and Melissa, and I guess Christy was, yeah, even Christy, even Holly. Don't get me started on what, there's a fly, I don't want to kill it, I'm just gonna shoo it away. Sorry, there was like a fly on the floor. Bro, Holly is such, like, she's one of the snakiest of them, actually. The way that she gets even a little bit of power and she immediately is like, we were here since Nia was 3 for 10 years, we've been loyal to you, Abby. And it's like, dude, you try to undermine her on every step. You complain all the time about the music being wrong, Nia not getting a special part, not being appreciated for being there for 10 years, not getting, like, Maddie being favored because she's a better dancer. I'm sorry, but, like, come on. And it's like, bro, like, is you dumb? Like, I'm not saying this in any AAVE type way. This is just how I talk because of the internet, but, like, dude, bro, it's almost like they have no self-awareness. And I think a big part of this uncanny valley feeling of being like, guys, is this real right now? Like, are you hearing yourselves? Like, you've literally just fed yourself a lie that you deserve good things just because you deserve good things, just like for no reason, just because you worked hard. Like, they have like these idioms, these dogmatic truisms that they fed to themselves, such as treat people with kindness, but then they apply it in ways which are so selfish and also just like incorrect. Like, first Holly gets really mad that no one sticks up for Nia, then she literally bullies Bryn, or is like completely fine with her being bullied, with Ashley being called a pig, and she has a huge problem with Nia, with Abby being mean to Nia for no reason and being like, that's mean-spirited, Abby, that's wrong, you don't do that, you don't treat children like this. But when Jill and Melissa run after Ashley, calling her a pig and telling Bryn not to talk back to adults when she's just like defending herself, or is like, I don't remember the exact context of that, but I know that Kendall literally yelled at Ashley and Jill was like fine with it, or rather she was like supportive of that. But at one point, like, Bryn said something like really small, and Jill like was like, oh honey, you don't talk back to grown-ups. Oh yeah, she was like dancing in front of Kendall, and Jill was like, oh, get out of her way, you're not even on the team. And Bryn was like, oh, I was dancing to the side, like I didn't mean to. And she's like, oh honey, you don't talk back to a grown-up. And Holly was there for everything, for all of it, and she didn't care. And it's like, I'm sure she thinks she's a very kind person. I'm sure she's not consciously, like, evil. And that's, I guess, the evil part is people don't care, they have no self-awareness, and they don't want to have any self-awareness. I don't think this is even, like, I think there is some correlation with intelligence, wherein if you're really smart, even if you don't think about it consciously, you're gonna think about it, just because you're so aware of the details of every sort of like social situation. But I think there's other circumstances, for example, neurodivergence, which makes it harder for you to like assimilate into these situations, but makes it easier to observe them, allow you to kind of see this deeper level of these interactions, this manipulation that is constantly being done, like this push and pull, in ways that are not even verbal. Like, most communication is not verbal. This is a fact, and this is illustrated on the show really well. Not because of the subject matter even, but because it allows you to like stop, watch, replay really authentic emotions. The way that someone says something, the look that they give. I just think it's profound. How fake people are, and how well the show illustrates that. I wish I could recap, but I don't really remember every detail. So just, yeah. I hope this was insightful.